All right. This is going to be very informal tonight, so if you need to get more food while I'm speaking, don't feel ashamed. Right? Go up, get food, go up, grab a drink, and so forth. But I did want to speak towards the beginning of this, so you guys can have some table discussion over what we are talking about. And tonight, really, I'm just going to share one story with you from Matthew 16. And so Jesus and his disciples are traveling, and they reach an area called Caesarea Philippi, which is a very pagan area about 25-30 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. And it's a very beautiful area, but it was very pagan, and there were lots of other guides in that area. And so Jesus and his disciples, they get to this area, and Jesus, he turns to his disciples and asks, "Who do the people say that I am?" And one by one, the disciples, they start rattling off answers. They say, some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you're a prophet. Some say you're Elijah or Jeremiah. And really, we could substitute that with what people today say Jesus is as well. A friend. A good moral teacher, a philosopher, a historical figure. Some people don't even think he was real. Some people would say he was a fictional character. But they start rattling off these answers of what people think, of who people think Jesus is, and then after they get done, Jesus turns to his disciples and he asks them the same question. He says, "But who do you say that I am?" And all the disciples, they start looking around and they're quiet, and none of them want to really give an answer because none of them want to be wrong. And finally, someone nudges and elbows Peter because he's kind of the unofficial leader of the disciples. And Peter thinks about it and thinks about all the teachings that he's heard Jesus say and all of the actions that he has witnessed Jesus do. And he finally says, "You are Christ, the Son of the living God." And slowly a smile starts appearing on Jesus' face because his disciples finally get it. They finally understand who he is. And it means that he can start revealing to them God's plan of redemption for humanity. And this is exactly what he does. If you read in Matthew 16, he goes on and he goes and he tells the disciples what is going to happen to him in the coming days. He has to go back to Jerusalem, where he's going to suffer at the hands of the chief priests and of the scribes and of the religious elite and the religious leaders. He's going to suffer, and then he's going to be killed. And 3 days later, he's going to rise from the dead. And he reveals this all to his disciples because they finally understand who he is. He is Christ, the Son of the living God. And after he gets done revealing all of this to his disciples, Peter kind of has a sidebar with Jesus. And he takes Jesus aside and he says, Jesus, none of that has to happen. There's a different way. We're going to make sure that none of that really happens to you. And Jesus' response to it is he looks Peter in the eye and he says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me. You are not thinking of the ways of God, but of the ways of man." And maybe that story is familiar with you, maybe it's not. For me, I grew up in the church, and I was kind of familiar with this story. I've always been kind of familiar with this story. And it always baffled me how Peter could go from being praised by God, understanding who Jesus is, being praised by Jesus, being told that on Peter, he is going to be the rock where the church is going to be built, and the gates of hell cannot go against it. From that to literally 5 verses later, being called Satan by Jesus himself. And I always wondered how that could happen, and I always thought that, well, Peter, he must have not really understood who Jesus was. He just kind of got the right answer. I don't know if growing up, if you had Sunday school or whatnot, but if none of us knew the answer to anything, someone just always blurted out Jesus, and you're usually correct. And so, maybe Peter did that. He was like, you're Christ, you're the Messiah, and he just guessed it and happened to be correct. And that's what I always thought happened, and he didn't fully understand what that meant, but as I studied this and was praying about this and thinking about this, I think I'm wrong in that thinking. I think Peter actually fully understood who Jesus was. And he was faced with the same question that you and I are faced with every day. You see, if Jesus was just a good moral teacher or a friend or John the Baptist or Elijah or Jeremiah or a prophet, like you can take his advice and you can take his wisdom, but you don't have to follow him. But if he is Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God, you have to follow him or choose to deny God and turn your back on God. And that's the question that Peter was faced with in this moment. And he knew that in order to be a true disciple of Jesus, a true disciple of Christ, that if Christ was going to suffer and die, he would have to suffer and die right alongside Christ. And so he didn't want to do that. So he provides an alternative. And Jesus looks at him and says, "Get behind me, Satan." Why does Jesus call Peter Satan in this moment? I think to understand that, we have to go back to Matthew 4, when Jesus is in the wilderness right after he was baptized, and Satan actually comes to him and tempts him. And Satan does the same thing that Peter is doing here in this moment. Satan is providing Jesus with an alternative. He's providing Jesus with an alternative of the things of man and not of the things of God. And so he calls him Satan and tells him to get away. And I think as we look at this passage, we have to come face to face with that question as well. Once you fully understand who Jesus is, that he's the Messiah, Christ, the Son of God, you also have to come face to face with this question. Am I going to follow him? Or am I going to choose the ways of man? Am I going to have my sights on the things of God? Or am I going to have my sights on the things of man? And Jesus, he goes on in verse 24, he goes on to talk about this further. And this is right after he calls Peter Satan. He turns to his disciples and he says, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Remember, this is right after he had revealed to all of the disciples his plan, God's plan of redemption for humanity. That he was going to have to suffer and die and be killed at the hands of the high priests and scribes and so forth. And then he uses this, he says, if anyone would come after me, he has to deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. He's saying you have to die too if you're going to be my disciple, if you're going to follow me. Verse 25, for whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And there are a lot of layers to this verse. One of the things I think is that whoever loses his life, whoever would save his life, tries to save his life by doing good and by doing right, being righteous, and by earning their salvation, it's a futile task. Like, it's not going to happen. They're going to end up being damned anyway. And so he says, whoever tries to do it on their own, tries to save their life by being a good person, by doing righteous acts, like, that's not going to be good enough, and you're going to end up losing your life anyway. Then he says, but whoever loses their life for me, whoever submits to me, is actually going to end up saving it. And not just saving their life, but the joy that that brings of being with God for eternity. And from there, he continues to go on. He says, for what will a profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? I think way too often we are so concerned about the 80 to 90 years, 100 if you eat a lot of fish and beans and stuff, kale. We're so concerned about the 80 to 90 years that we have on this earth that we forget about the next 80 to 90 million years. We're so concerned about getting as much joy and pleasure from this life that we have, whether it's money or cars or sex or whatever. We're so concerned about getting as much joy as we can in the little time that we have, that we forget about eternity. Are your thoughts on the things of man, the things of this earth? Nice cars, nice house, dream job, dream spouse, perfect life. And none of those are bad. I want all of that for all of you. But are we so concerned with that we forget about the things of God and the things of eternity? And so my question for you guys tonight is, where's your desire? Where's your heart? Are you focused on the things of man? Or are you focused on the things of God and the things of heaven? We try to cling to this life, don't we? We try to cling to the good things of this life. And I know that better than anyone. I used to not get anxious, and then I had a daughter, and now I get anxious, like on Monday, just 2 days ago. I had to travel to Nashville and come back, and I had to get up before my daughter left. Or before my daughter, I had to get up and leave before my daughter got up. And so I was so concerned that on Sunday night, I went up there after she was already in bed and already halfway asleep, and I just had to tell her I love her one more time because I was so anxious about maybe I'm going to get into a car wreck and she's never going to see me again. Like I used to not get anxious about those things, and so we try to cling to this life, but we forget about the next. And I'm guilty of that. But here's the thing, right? Christ says we have to die. We have to take up our cross. For some people, that might mean literal death. We kind of forget about persecution being in this country. Because we don't really face it. But maybe God's calling someone in this room to go to the Middle East. Maybe God's calling someone in this room to go somewhere where people are hostile to Christians. And you might get injured or killed as a result. Are you clinging to this life that you're going to deny God? And so, as we wrap up, where are your thoughts? Where are your desires? Are they on the things of this earth, and the things of this life, and the things of man? Or are they on the things of God? I didn't mean for it to be that big of a downer. But that was the text that we were given, that I was told to preach on tonight. And so we have some discussion questions at your table for you guys to discuss this further as you eat. And so have fun discussing.
It's full.